Hi, my name is Amelia Pamar, and this is GENZ.Academy, a one-of-a-kind podcast and digital training ground that is preparing the next breed of Generation Z entrepreneurs and creators. If you, my friend, are planning to leave your mark on this world, then you are in the right place. Welcome to GENZ.Academy. I hope you're ready. And we aren't your typical podcast. We want you to notice what makes some of these entrepreneurs great. It's not just what they say, it's what they do. So in our prologue to each episode, we'll talk about 3 things that you should watch out for this interview. Today, this episode was with Shaan Patel, and you'll get into the intro and his bio in a little bit later. But I want you to watch 3 things very, very carefully. Watch how Shaan answers questions. Not only is he thorough, he makes sure that there's no question left unanswered. Second, watch how he does a great job of making the interviewer comfortable. Shaan often uses the phrase, "That's a great question," but notice how he does it. He never does it in exactly the same way. Third, when you hear Shaan's answers, notice his perspective on risk in entrepreneurship. It seems as if he's built a world-class backup plan every step of the way. Whether it be his book, his brand, his company, his journey through authorship and entrepreneurship is something to be discussed. Let's get right into this episode with Shaan Patel. Now, Shaan is a rare breed of an entrepreneur, influencer, and author. Whether it be writing one of the most viral high school valedictorian speeches in history, if you don't believe me, just look up Shaan Patel graduation speech, to building multiple 7-figure businesses while in college. Did I tell you that he's also studying for an MD, MBA degree at Yale? Well, today we're so excited to have Shaan on. Mark Cuban calls him the future Tony Robbins of our generation. Some call him the Indian guy from Shark Tank, but right here at GENZ.Academy, we just see a future billionaire. Shaan, what did I miss?
Hi, Amelia. That was very flattering. Thank you for the flattering introduction, and I'm happy to be here. Happy to share any value that I can with listeners.
Well, Shaan, we're excited to have you. We're also hoping to just shed some light on what you did from in college to throughout your college experience. I mean, you only finished your education recently, but you've been building ever since you started. And so, what does it mean for you? What did the nature of entrepreneurship look like when you were growing up while still in high school? I hear that your parents kind of came from an entrepreneurial background too, with running a hotel when you were younger. Did you ever get involved in that?
Yeah, so like many Indian Americans, my parents owned a motel, which I actually grew up in.
Yeah.
So I grew up in the motel, and I basically lived there until I was about 15, 16 years
Wow.
old, and then I went to college shortly after. But one of the benefits of growing up in this motel, which was not in the greatest part of town, and it was kind of run down, etc., but one of the big benefits is I got to see on a day-to-day basis how a business runs, how operations work, thinking about revenue and costs, etc. Because my parents we were living there together. So, I think I was inbred into a business right from the beginning, and it really helped sort of guide, how I think about business today. So, I would, even from a very young age, I was selling Pokemon cards or CDs or doing internet referrals, things, all these little side gigs, side gigs while I was in school, because I was just fascinated by the aspect of entrepreneurship, starting businesses, etc. So I think your background and how early you start can really impact how you end up succeeding in the future. Especially, I know a lot of Gen Zers are listening, and so they're so young. There's no excuse to try, and it doesn't matter if you fail, because every business that I've ever started, every side gig or hustle was just a lesson that taught me how to succeed later.
I mean, that's so well said. I think maybe one thing we'd love to clue in our listeners on is, there is this very strong, especially within an Asian background, like I share that with you, Shaan, is that there is this very strong emphasis on education and the priority of education. Yet you seem to be able to balance that and entrepreneurship hand in hand since high school. There's a lot of entrepreneurs these days that say you can have it one or the other. Could you talk a little bit about how you were able to balance the two ever since high school and then early college?
Yeah, so education is interesting. There's all kinds of debates on, the future of higher education. I have my most successful startup ever is a educational business. It's PrepExpert. We do SAT and ACT online classes for students to help them prepare for these exams for college. And then I personally have had a lot of education in my life, whether it was going to college and medical school at USC and then going for my MBA at Yale. I've gone through a lot of higher education as well. And, so the question I think that comes up a lot of times is, do you, and this is really came up on my Shark Tank segment when I pitched my company PrepExpert and made a deal with Mark Cuban, was, do you want to be, they asked me, do you want to be a doctor or do you want to be an entrepreneur? And I think the question can be changed to, do you want to go to school or do you want to be an entrepreneur? I think it was really the question, because a lot of people are unable to balance both. And I've luckily been able to start all of my businesses and focus on entrepreneurship and focus on school at the same time. Is it easy? Not at all. But do I think it's easier than it used to be? Absolutely. And why is that? Because of technology. If you think about how people would start businesses 20, 30 years ago, they would have a small shop in a location. They're tied to that location. They're tied to the hours. They have to either physically be there or have an employee. There's a lot of different things that entrepreneurship and businesses would be tied to all these things. And many still are, but I think now in the age of internet businesses and startups and working remotely and being able to be on your phone and answer emails while you're having dinner or lunch or whatever it may be, you're not tied to a landline, etc. So I think the internet has really changed people's ability to do multiple things at once, because we do have all of these tools and communication at our disposal to do business 24 hours a day, rather than just the 8 hours that you could be open. Do I think you should do it 24 hours a day? Maybe, maybe not, but I think a lot more can be automated with the internet, and I think that's what the difference is.
I think, Shaan, you have had a phenomenal success, starting service-based companies, information, based companies. You wrote this fantastic article on Founder that we will link below on the nature of starting your own side hustle. But when you start that first side hustle, let's say you want to create a course. What does that look like for you? Because you never look to kind of put your platform or your course on a more traditional platform like Udemy. You've always seemed to really at the core build it all directly to consumer. And that seems from our experience to be extremely resource intensive, extremely time intensive. What does that look like in the beginning for you, and how do you get your first 15, 20 customers, and then how do you get your first 100?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, the first thing that anytime you're building a course or an informational product or service that I think about is, how do I make this service 10 times better than the next service? What's going to make this so much better that people have to have it? And I think at the end of the day, all marketing, there's a great book by Seth Godin, Purple Cow. He really goes into how your product is the marketing. It wasn't until I had my first class at PrepExpert and I taught students how to improve their scores from the 50th percentile to the 90th percentile, and they improved hundreds of points, that I started getting that word of mouth and picking up. So it's, at the end of the day, you have to create a great product or service. Now, in terms of your question about Udemy and some of the tools that are at your disposal now to create online courses, I think they're all fantastic. The only reason that I used to build courses from scratch, and we still do to some extent here, with my startups, is because when I first started 7, 8 years ago, we didn't have as many tools, or at least they weren't as robust as they were now. I think there's no reason that founders shouldn't use some of the tools that are out there. I particularly like using Thinkific, is very good, teachable, and I think the issue that I had with Udemy years ago when I first tried to use it, I don't know what the policy is now, but they took such a large revenue share. I think it was 50% at some point, and even up to 75%. That the whole point of being an entrepreneur is that you keep most of the revenue and not give it up. So that was kind of the issue that I had with Udemy specifically. But I think it's possible to do it from scratch. I think it's a lot easier and less resource intensive, as you mentioned, to use some of the platforms at your disposal. And we still use some of them and white label them. I think Thinkific being one that we use at both PrepExpert and ClearHat. And so I think it's certainly possible. Doesn't matter which route you decide to go. I think if you don't have as much time, these platforms are great.
Okay. I think this is something that we really want to talk a lot more about. But before we jump too much in this, could we just rewind back a little bit? Could we talk a little about how the business started? And were you recruiting people from your high school when it came to PrepExpert, which is now, and for our audience, it's now a 7-figure side hustle that's grown into a full-fledged business. I think that has employees all across the United States, if not the globe. So could you talk a little bit about how that first started, and who were you hiring? Were you hiring people from your school, and were you finding and teaching people from your school? Because I found this interesting dynamic, with our students and some of our partners, in that it's sometimes harder to recruit from your own school than it is to go to another school and recruit from that school. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. The thing about, so I started PrepExpert back in high school. So this was, 7, 8 years ago now, when I first started the company, or I guess I started actually in college. After I graduated high school, I wanted to essentially help students prepare for the SAT and ACT the way that I did, because I improved my own score from average to perfect, which helped me get hundreds of thousands of dollars in scholarships, helped me get into great universities, etc. So I wanted to help other students. So I essentially taught the classes in my hometown of Las Vegas, which is where I grew up. And the way that I recruited students back then was through search engine optimization. So we use a lot of SEO to target parents of high school students in the area. And back then, search engine optimization was kind of not that advanced. So it was very easy to rank at the top of Google for certain search terms. And that was really what drove the majority of our original enrollments into the class.
Wow.
After so then I eventually I was able to teach the pilot class, because I had, I think, like 12 students in the first class. And their scores improved significantly from the 50th percentile to the 90th percentile. Then I had to do very little marketing. The word sort of just spread word of mouth. This class is going to improve your score. Your kid should take it. And so then there was almost no marketing. It was just kids enrolling because they had seen other kids do well with it. And then what I did in terms of hiring, you asked about what did I hire next? You've got to hire top-notch people. So the way that I went about it is, if I'm going to hire my next instructor, it's going to be someone who is equally or almost as good at the SAT or ACT as good as I am. And so, I got a perfect SAT score. So I wanted, obviously, to try to get someone who got a perfect score. That's a little hard to hire. It's not that common. So what I did instead is I made my requirement that you had to be able to score in the 99th percentile so that you're completely proficient in the exam in any questions that would have come across it. You're in the top 1%. And then the second piece of it was I train them specifically on the material that I teach in the classrooms. So between the two pieces, and I guess the third piece is they also needed to have previous tutoring, and now we require hundreds of hours of tutoring experience for our tutors. And so the three pieces together, having that top score to be proficient, having the tutoring experience in the past, hundreds of hours, and then being trained by us on our material is what really made for great instructors. Because again, the instructors, especially if you're teaching live classes, are going to be what make your product, and they're the ones delivering the product. So you have to be really top notch. And some people say I'm too stringent with my requirements, but the thing is, I don't want subpar instructors teaching my curriculum, because that reduces the quality of my product, which eventually reduces the word of mouth and marketing.
Absolutely. Now, at what point would you consider yourself to be very, very still hands-on in terms of the teaching material at PrepExpert, or you've been looking to phase yourself out of the company to make it almost run autonomously at PrepExpert?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the answer to that is I've pretty much retired from teaching live online classes. So I don't teach the classes myself that with students. However, what I do is I teach the video courses. So, there's tons of students who would love to be tutored and taught by me, but my time is limited between residency,
I think 8 best-selling SAT and ACT prep books. Now that number is insane for most people. Just have one best-selling Uncharted topic book, but 8 number 1 best-selling books. Could you explain what that did for your business? Did it do much for your business? Because now there's a lot of authors that are not even seeking, writing these books as a medium for making revenue. They're seeing it for brand building for your company. What has that done for your brand, PrepExpert?
Yeah. So, the original thought before I ever started the company was I just wanted to write a book, and I thought that would be good enough. But, as I went into it, I wasn't really getting a book deal from a large publisher. Now, this was 7 years ago, and self-publishing wasn't nearly as big as it is now. And, eventually, after I got rejected from a bunch of publishers, I was like, all right, forget it. I'll just use the material I've written for this book, and I'll start some courses. Turned out to be a big blessing in disguise, because thank God I got rejected from the publishers and didn't get the deal, because I wouldn't have started the company otherwise. So then, I ended up getting the book deal with McGraw-Hill. That ended up being a number 1 bestseller. And, a lot of people are like, well, why do you keep doing books? Why don't you just keep doing courses? And the books are really the platform for both my brand, as you mentioned, but also it gives me thought leadership, right? So it's the thought leadership in the field of these are the types of strategy and content that really is effective for preparing for these tests, and that puts me out there as a thought leader in the space. What's really interesting is at my Shark Tank audition, I remember when I was pitching the casting director to be on Shark Tank, he was totally unimpressed while I was giving my 1-minute pitch to be, until, I had in a folder next to me my best-selling book. And once I pulled out the book, his eyes lit up. He's like, I can't believe you're an author, and and all these things. And I said I was an author in the pitch, but it doesn't make as big of an impact sometimes on people until they see the physical book, etc. And like you said, that goes back to branding. But what's really funny is if I didn't have that book, I don't think I would have been on Shark
Wow.
Tank. And so, do I think books are important? Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
So that's actually so interesting. Do you think so? The nature of the book and the book's content. Could we talk a little bit about how maybe the writing and process of writing the book might have actually formed and help you form and formulate thoughts that you are teaching, help you formulate and cement ideas?
Mm-hmm.
Because this is something we really urge, a lot of Generation Z and millennial entrepreneurs to do is write something, write something that has volume. It not only, helps, clear up some, clarity for what you want to speak or what you want to teach about or what you want to found. It might also provide you some of these incredible opportunities. So could we talk a little bit about the nature of writing the book and then maybe how that lent itself into the course?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think it's really important what you just said, and really, really something that people don't realize. I always say the most important skill that I took away from school was writing, is learning how to write really well in order to get my thoughts and ideas across. And writing books is probably my least favorite thing to do, but I do a lot of it, as you've mentioned, because it's very painstaking, it's very tedious, and it's very difficult, which is why so many people do not write and don't
Yeah.
like to. It's a very tedious process, but if you go through it, what happens is you'll get many breakthroughs that are absolutely game-changing. I had many breakthroughs in the process of writing these books on which strategies would work best, what responds well, etc. But one of the biggest breakthroughs I had was just the teaching pedagogy or the teaching principles we use in the course, which is while I was writing, I used a format. I would teach a strategy and go over the concepts behind a strategy. Then, so it was really 4 principles. It was strategy, example, practice, and review. And everything I would write would be under this format of 4 principles, which would teach a strategy, then go over an example to show people a concrete way to approach it. Then, after the example, I would practice on practice problems, and then finally review past concepts and things like that. And what I found was it was a great way for me to organize my writing, but it was also a tremendous way to organize the course, and students really loved going over strategies and going over example problems, practicing them, and then reviewing them. And so it really informed sort of how we teach the courses still to this day, was because of how I organized my writing back 8 years, 7
So
years
this is
ago.
a book you wrote, or at least the first book was right between or right during your senior year in high school or freshman year in college. Is that right about that time?
It was actually my last year. It was my senior year of college,
Wow.
because I didn't immediately start the company right after high school. I took a few years to actually go to college and study medicine or
Yes.
pre-medicine, etc. And then it wasn't until my last year that my schedule freed up, and I thought I really wanted to do something impactful before I head off to medical school, and that's kind of when it all
So the
happened.
business really, when do you think it took off? Do you say it was your senior year in high school? I mean, not high school, sorry, senior year in college. Is that the year and break? Because one thing that there is this huge stress this is actually one of the questions that I had planned earlier, so I'm glad this kind of ties into it. But the nature of being a pre-med student in college is extremely stressful in itself. Like, you have to make sure you have these certain GPA requirements. You have to make sure you're involved, and I'm sure you don't have any problem being involved. But education is something that's really time intensive. And so, how were you really hands-on in the company back during your junior and senior year of college?
Yeah, so that's a good point. Is you have to be able to prioritize your time and when to
Yeah.
do things, right? So for me, the reason that I did not start the company or the book right out of high school into college is because I was focused on my GPA, my MCAT, my research, my volunteering, etc., to make me a good medical school applicant for the first 3 years
Uh-huh.
of college. Then, in my last year of college, my application had been submitted, so I was all done at the very beginning of senior year. And then I was like, well, I need something else to do now. Why don't I write a book? So it was basically, I found a sweet spot in my education when things were a little bit lighter because my application was all done. I had worked really hard for 3 years in building everything that would be needed for a good medical school application. And then I had some free time to then, I use usually my free time for entrepreneurship and building things because that's what I like to do. That's kind
Yeah.
of my hobby. Um, and, I think it really can pay off. And so that's really just, I think it's a function of being able to figure out when is there some downtime in your life, whether it's education or otherwise, and then using that downtime
Mm.
effectively, right? Rather than wasting it. It's okay to, I'm not saying don't socialize or don't
Yeah.
go out and have fun, but I think it's putting some limits on how much you can, go to the movies,
Yeah, I mean,
etc.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And the thing is, there is so many opportunities nowadays to get your voice heard nowadays. Like everything from LinkedIn to writing blog posts and whatever. There's just the reach has never been where it is, and there's never been as many users watching these platforms. Even YouTube has become actually amazing for building some form of thought leadership, some form of brand, and a completely different kind of amazing hobby that could really add a lot of value to your life instead of just extracting value in time.
Mm-hmm.
So what if you had to pick, and if you had to suggest three things for maybe a college student, younger high school student, or someone who's just graduating college, there's something that might be really, really valuable for them, regardless of their occupation or career. What kind of hobby would that be? Whether it be writing a book, whether it be picking up pen and paper, and doing maybe a blog post. What or emailing people, cold emailing people. What might be a good hobby for someone to pick up regardless of their career?
Yeah, I think the first thing I would do is pick something really interesting to you to learn a lot about, because one of the keys to entrepreneurship is to have very specialized
Mm-hmm.
knowledge. Then, because for me, it's like I have a very specialized knowledge of the SAT and ACT, very specific. Not everyone is going to have that, so that gives me a leg up on the
Yeah.
competition. So what I would do is pick something interesting to you. What do I think would be interesting to people who are graduating college? I mean, I think the space of artificial intelligence would be great if you want to learn more about how AI will power the world later. Or so I think that would be one thing. But it doesn't have to be anything. I'm not going to give you the topic, but that's just one example. Is I would pick something, by me saying artificial intelligence, I'm saying look at an industry that's
Yeah.
up and coming, maybe the Internet of Things, because that's when the millionaires and billionaires are made, is when they start companies in these fields. So that's one thing.
No,
Go ahead.
I think that's super interesting because the nature of there's this interesting dichotomy that comes up where some students that I've met and I've worked with, they spend a lot of time researching what's the next big thing. What is the next internet trend? They look at McKinsey studies, research studies, talking about what does the next in the future look like. What is the nature of mobile capital payments? The future of the workforce in not just local but global. And they research maybe what career paths might more strongly be demanded in the future. Do you recommend that kind of approach, or is it just to be wary of that? Instead, be super specific in one thing, and you can make money regardless of your field.
Exactly. Yeah. So I really don't think it matters necessarily about I think as long as you're doing something that you're very interested in, that's what's important. and that you're good at. Like if you can find something that has those two things in common, you'll be able to make money at it. Is it important that it's in an up and coming field? I think so, but should that drive your decision making process? No. I think at the end of the day, it has to be something you're good at and that you're interested in. So the first thing is I would learn about that. The second thing I would do is probably start either a blog or a YouTube channel and share your knowledge that you're learning about that
Okay.
topic. Share it for free, right? And the reason I say that is because it'll give you an opportunity to articulate your thoughts. And from all of that content that you're building from the blog and from the YouTube videos, you might be able to, from the blog, you might be able to build a book out of those blog posts eventually. If you write, one blog post a day for 365 days, you all of a sudden have
Yeah.
365 page book, you know. And I'm being obviously exaggerating a little bit here, but I think that'll help you craft your thoughts, etc. Or you can do YouTube if you don't like writing, and you might be able to build up a subscribership, get YouTube royalties, etc. And then finally, the third thing I would do is read. What really changed my life is when I started reading self-development books and ways to essentially optimize my life and be happier, more successful, etc. I think books like How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie, Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill, all of these classics to get you started, and then you'll find other books that are similar. But essentially, developing a voracious
Uh-huh.
appetite for learning about how to improve in life will only lead to more success, not only in your own life personally, but also in your
I think
businesses,
that's so well
etc.
said. So you recommend kind of for students, and this is something we stress, so I completely agree with you in this, but even if they don't have not formulated their ideas yet, or even if they are just learning about it, you recommend them sharing it.
Hmm. Absolutely. What are your thoughts? I mean, let's say you're really interested in, if it's cryptocurrency or artificial intelligence or micro banking, whatever it may be, I would read, 10, 20, 50 pages on it, and then write a blog post with some opinions, make a point about what you read, etc. Because I think that by sharing your knowledge about what you're learning, you'll create that thought leadership. And by starting to build that brand, that thought leadership early, that's what will give you a platform to then write that book, start that business, whatever it may be. When, right now, it's just, I'd say you can't, a lot of people do this backwards. They start a business and try to become an
Uh,
expert later. I think you need to become an expert first and then start a
that I think that
business.
makes a lot of sense. Um, I think you've always had
Mm-hmm.
also a knack to get what you do and what you've done in front of people, whether it be
Mm-hmm.
you know what you've done in high school and pitched it to an incredible amount of scholarship committees, or you went and pitched at Shark Tank. You've pitched to newspaper outlets. You've gotten press. Could you tell us a little bit about what it takes and what you really, maybe a few of your strategies to really get what you have done in front of people?
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, I think there's a few things. One is you have to not be afraid to fail because, I've had a lot of success, um, whether it's getting into Forbes, Business Insider, Inc., Shark Tank, all these things. But what people don't see is all the failures. I mean, there are thousands of emails that never got
Uh-huh.
responded to, that fell through the cracks where editors were like, this isn't the story. But people see the handful of successes and think that I'm really good at it. It's really just a law of numbers. It's, I might pitch 100 editors and three or four
Yeah.
will say yes, but those three or four are from, big name publications because that's how I picked it. So I think one is you can't be afraid to fail, and it doesn't matter if some people don't believe in it. The second is you really have to be able to think in terms of other people's shoes. It's having that emotional intelligence. So when I pitch people, I don't pitch them from my perspective on like, Well, I guess I used to. I used to send my media pitches and say, I just launched this company. It's going to be
Yeah.
great, right? And that's not a story that any editor wants to run. An editor wants to run a story about 5 tips to help you prepare for the SAT if they're an
Yeah.
education writer, right? So then I start thinking about what's going to make a great story for the editor, and I start pitching that instead rather than what's going to make a great story for me. And so really thinking in what is going to bring the most value to the other person. And then the final thing is really just being able to articulate my thoughts well through writing. I think this is why writing a blog will help you become a better writer. This is why reading lots will help you become a better writer, because it will be very useful to you in business when you're pitching. I remember my Shark Tank producer, he had me respond to 20 Q&A, like potential questions sharks could pitch at me before my pitch. And I responded to them, and I wrote it up in a document on a flight. I think I was going from New York to LA or something. And he wrote back saying, "This is the best Q&A document I've ever seen by any Shark
Wow.
Tank entrepreneur." And it's literally because I spent the time to really thoughtfully write, and I have that experience. And so, if there's any skill that I can recommend to anyone out there, is writing. You'll always be writing in business, whether it's pitching, whether it's writing website copy, whether it's writing books, course material. You're always going to be writing, and it's an
Well,
invaluable skill.
Shaan, it's been an absolute privilege to have you on. I think the amount of value that I think our listeners have gotten from this episode, I think is invaluable. But now that you've taken a lot of time and energy to share with us, we would like to hear more about you. What's next for you? You recently are launching this incredible digital marketing agency and learning platform for called ClearHatMarketing. That maybe is your next step. We also have lots of listeners that are right now in high school and in college, and you run one of the forward-leading prep companies all across the U.S. and globally. So would you mind, this is your time now, Shaan, tell them what they can do to get involved in both these companies.
Absolutely, yeah. So for the listeners out there that want to learn more about digital marketing, whether it's anything from search engine optimization to getting PR and media to Facebook ads, they can check out my company, ClearHatMarketing. We have courses on there as well as agency services, and that's at ClearHatMarketing.com. And for the students out there who are interested in getting more SAT and ACT prep tips to do well on these exams to go to college in the United States, they should check out my company, PrepExpert.com, where we offer lots of classes, free resources, blog posts, etc., to help you get started with that as
That's
well.
fantastic. Now I hear you offer free classes or a free introductory class on ClearHat Marketing. Um, would you mind telling a little bit about that and how they can get connected?
Absolutely. So if you go to clearhatmarketing.com, you'll see a tab with free classes. There's one taught by me on the secrets of getting PR and media, some of which I talked a little bit about today, but in that webinar, I go much more in depth into exactly what to do. My business partner has a couple of free classes at ClearHat Marketing as well, which include how to do and run Facebook ads well and really generate a ROI with those, as well as how to start a business and hustle your way into creating a great business. So we've got lots of free classes just to get you started and dip your feet in at ClearHat Marketing.
It has been an absolute privilege. I hope and I'm excited for your next steps. See you soon.